I pose the question at a time when we're developing targeted and molecular therapies and we're looking at the biology of cancer. How do we help patients understand that molecular pathology must be part of their analysis of their tumor, and how can we, as patients and survivors and advocates, play a role in inspiring the chance for us to facilitate tissue collection? And if more patients were given the opportunity to contribute tissue, what better way to bring meaning to our experience, to our disease? But we need to be asked. And so today is the beginning of facilitating a discussion to help patients maybe create a paradigm shift. Jenny, we'll start with you, and the simple question of what do you think some of the major concerns are surrounding biospecimen and tissue collection, and what's the urgency?
The Inflammatory Breast Cancer Research Foundation took this cause on very seriously when we started to ask researchers why they weren't studying our less common form of breast cancer, and we were told it's lack of tissue. And so one of the things we began to look at is how could we remedy that? But accessing tissue can be challenging. Academic facilities aren't necessarily willing to give that up to a tissue bank. And I don't think the patient population has been adequately educated about the value that is in a tissue block. And especially if you're in a small community hospital, perhaps, you don't even have a physician who quite is as savvy, perhaps, as someone from an academic institution who maybe is more involved in research. But there's no question, as we move more and more into the realm of personalized medicine, tissue is going to be the place where the answers lie.
Well, I think for me, the word paradigm shift that you used when you were doing your introduction is one of the most significant issues in front of us. And you said that the patients need to be asked. And for us, what we believe is that the patients need to do the asking. And with the normal tissue bank, what I hope we've developed is a model. We now have over 3,000 donors who have donated core tissue from breast with no evidence of disease, 6 pages of annotated HIPAA-protected data, and we have a waiting list. We have women who come and we have to turn them away because we can't take them. The consumer wants this over, and one of the ways to, I think, change the paradigm of research and the time that it takes is to have normal controls. So my focus is not just a biorepository, but providing normal controls outside of a silo, available to the world, and we're going to be putting everything on virtual tissue bank so that you'll be able to do research in silico and have access to these. I think that the public has demonstrated, at least 3,000 women so far have demonstrated, including a healthy proportion of minorities, that they want this over and they're willing to do it. So it can be done in other cancers where you can get accessible normal tissue for a control. So instead of your best statistical, it's not a guess, it's a statistical decision, instead of that you can put your tumor tissue on top of your normal tissue and thus eliminate those proteins or things that are evidence that are equally expressed in the normal. And you can identify those proper targets. So I think the public needs more than just one place at the table. I think we need to be 75% at the table. You tell us what you need if you're a scientist or a researcher. If we have it and we can provide it for you, or if we can get it, we'll get it for you. I call it kind of, let's giddy up.
Patients should demand and insist and scream for their specimens to be collected. We all know the rate-limiting step, the obstacle to this primarily is at the clinician level due to conservatism, et cetera. It's a natural hesitancy, but the reality is patients want their tissues to be used and to be employed and to not only help their own diagnosis, but to advance the field. And I think that often gets lost in the sauce, and we hear constantly the doctors say, well, we can't get tissue from the patient. Well, why not? Have you tried? Patients are willing to take that risk, I think. The other aspect I would comment on is you have to make it easy for them. And to that extent, we've in the Addario Lung Cancer Medical Institute, it's voiced as Alchemy. In Alchemy, we've set up centralized tissue banks, standardized data systems. Again, not that unusual to what other groups are doing, But in lung, particularly, the tissues are often not collected. The vast majority of patients are diagnosed at late stage or end stage. And sadly, a lot of those cases, the patients have not even been asked to give tissue, and they would. So I would say having boots on the ground, processes, systems in place, and a well-educated patient to demand molecular testing, demand that the biopsy be collected, demand that the biopsy be re-biopsied after being exposed to treatment. Next, we'll hear probably a scientific view on this, how the tissue changes as opposed to when you're exposed to therapy. Sadly, there is no real standard of care, particularly in lung cancer right now, and the vast majority of patients are never even offered molecular testing.
I have a very close family friend who is diagnosed with lung cancer, and she's down in Florida. I'm up in New York, so I wasn't able to go to the doctor with her, but I'm trying to educate her, ask for molecular testing, and she, is doing what her doctor told her. The doctor, I found out later, thought that she couldn't handle the biopsy procedure, thought that it wouldn't be a good idea, so he didn't do it, didn't really talk to her about it until the end when I said, did you have all these things done? She was put on a targeted treatment, and as we can guess, without knowing if she had the target, it didn't really work. So now faced with, the treatment she was on didn't work, she, trying to understand, how do we get her, educated about this and where do we go from here? Now she's gone through, really a hard time on chemotherapy and all these targeted treatments, and during this, does that outweigh the initial, would it have been more difficult to do the biopsy in the beginning? So just the little personal flavor of how important this issue and how important this issue is, and how important it is for patients to understand from the get-go, how this can help you, and demand from your doctor to get tested, see if these life-saving therapies can help you, and also educate from the physician side of how essential this is, and get teams of physicians, you have the oncologist, you have the surgeon, you have the pathologist, get everybody together to understand how important this is and get everybody on the same page.
I think it's definitely time to get the pathologist out of the laboratory. And, I went and I met my pathologist, and I sat in his office, and he said, this is the first time a patient has ever done this. And we've become friends. And we sat together, and it was so interesting because also even the way the pathologist delivered the explanation of my diagnosis was entirely different than the way the surgeon delivered it. And it was also coming firsthand.
The stereotype of the pathologist is they're off working in the basement with no contact with patients whatsoever. And this is a real opportunity to bring pathology to impacting your treatment, impacting clinical care.
As a patient, and advocate of research, finding out the importance of tissue to researchers, and talking to patients, they knew nothing at all about it, and they were very upset, actually, that they didn't. In our home community, I live in Arizona, I partnered with a grassroots organization, Arizona Multiple Myeloma Network. We got a grant through our state cancer coalition to do a tissue awareness. We didn't want to do education because there's a lot of infrastructure that wasn't out there, but we need to educate our patients. We tell them to go on clinical trials, and then we had to say, here's what a clinical trial is. And we're doing the same thing with tissue. We want you to get this tissue. Now we need to tell you what tissue is. We did 3 pilot programs throughout the state. We hit, the elderly, our cultural, and the regular population. We did an evaluation on this, I think that came out of it, that 61% before they went through it thought that they were going to die when they were asked to give tissue. That's a lot. We need to educate our patients. And I don't mean, it's like Selma said, you put a brochure in front of them, most of the time it's not getting read. We need to talk to them. We also came up with a documentation, which I've heard. It was a Dear Doctor letter. And it said, Dear Doctor, should the occasion come up that I can give tissue or, have the opportunity to give tissue to research, please talk to me. The doctor had to sign. It was not anything that had to go through IRB. This was something initiated more or less from the patient. We did this, and they had them sign it and put it in their file. So if the occasion came up that they had a biopsy, they had surgery, they expected their doctor to talk to them. Because they did come back with us and say, no, we're really not going to, do this conversation. So that's what prompted that. It's eye-opening. During our presentation, we also had Research Advocacy Network come out, who has done a lot with tissue, especially for patients. They have a lot of good resources, and they came out and gave a presentation. And in the second part, we had community people on tissue that could answer any of the questions. Everyone that left was willing to give tissue should they be asked. I think we need to educate patients. They want to do it. They just want to know what's going on.